Eu sou secretária do Chapter e também trabalho na diretoria de marketing. E hoje nós convidamos a Natalie O'Neill para apresentar a palestra Os 30 anos da Química Verde. E, enfim, a palestra vai ser em inglês, então vou introduzir ela aqui em inglês. We invite Natalie O'Neill to present the lecture 30 Years of Green Chemistry. Natalie received her PhD from the University of Albany in 2017. Her graduate research resulted in the first X-ray diffraction studies of highly sensitive compounds of multiply charged, non-planar, and planar polyaromatic hydrocarbons. This work was published in 7 peer-reviewed journals. During her graduate studies, she felt that the topics of sustainability, toxicology, and environmental hazards were missing from the traditional graduate chemistry curriculum. Therefore, she pursued a 1-year certification course in Green Chemistry and Chemical Stewardship, attended the American Chemical Society Green Chemistry and Sustainable Energy Summer School in 2016, and became actively involved in the network of early career sustainable scientists and engineers, NESI. She is now the co-executive director of NESI with Alexandra Hicken, and they facilitate a board of directors to lead a global movement of young professionals working on or interested in solutions to today's most pressing sustainability challenges. She worked at Utica College as both an adjunct and visiting assistant professor of chemistry while finishing her PhD studies. She served at Utica College as both an adjuncted assistant professor of chemistry from 2015 to 2019, introducing green chemistry to both major and non-major courses. She left Utica College to follow her passion, teaching and empowering the next generation of scientists to use sustainable approaches through green chemistry at Beyond Benign. Natalie is looking to connect with scientists and engineers across disciplines to share resources and forge collaborations. She envisions a prosperous and sustainable future for all, facilitated by collaborative and sustainable approaches to scientists. Welcome, Natalie. You can present now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that introduction. I will say I sound so fancy. So I hope that I can deliver on that promise, and also that I will cover all the things that have happened in green chemistry in the past 30 years. So I'm going to get started. My contact information is there. I'm often on Twitter, so if you're interested in follow along or tweet out today. I love to see kind of the green chemistry buzz going on. So as I was introduced in kind of very formal way, I won't spend too much time on this slide, but I do just want to say, I know that there are lots of students tuning in, or maybe professors as well, that give direction to students. And so what I'd like to say is really that sounds like a really great kind of linear path of how I got to where I am today, but there were many detours along that path, and finding green chemistry and bringing it into my own education was one of those detours. So I will say that green chemistry in the past 30 years, and what I'm going to talk to you about today, has advanced a great deal, but it hasn't necessarily made it into the education system. So I have a PhD in chemistry. Green chemistry was not in my PhD program. It's something that I went out and sought for myself outside of a program. And so we are really saying that there's been advances, but it may not be in your educational system. And so I am definitely a product of that, even though 30 years of green chemistry has passed. So I currently work for Beyond Benign, and so I'm joining you today from the green chemistry education realm. Beyond Benign is a nonprofit organization, so I just also want to put that as the kind of intro to this talk as well. So I do want to just kind of lay out for the day what the kind of plan in my presentation is. 30 years of green chemistry is a lot to cover in about 15 minutes. I'm going to try to keep it to 45 minutes. I know attention span also online is shorter, and I'm not sure I can talk for that long, although I could talk about green chemistry all day. So I do want to give you some historical context. So why the term green chemistry in the creation of the term green chemistry happened in the United States. I'll talk about the founders, the activities that have gone on. I'll talk about Beyond Benign as well. really then the position and the evolution of green chemistry in the last 30 years, and then challenges and limitations of the implementation of green chemistry in institutions and also in companies. And again, all of this with the caveat that I am, in terms of maybe 6 years into my learning of green chemistry, and that I'm coming from an academic and a nonprofit background as well. So putting all of that out there in terms of the presentation today, I do just want to start, because I am going to go into chemistry and kind of talking about how did the term green chemistry come about. I do want to highlight that chemistry has done a ton for us. So thanks to the chemical advances, we are able today to really have the quality of life that we do, right? The life expectancy rose from 47 in the 1900s to 75 years in the 1990s. So we have a lot to thank chemistry for. But these kind of achievements do also come at really a price. The manufacture and use of the disposal and synthetic chemicals has to take a toll on human health and the environment, and it has to date. And so I just want to preference all the things I'm going to kind of say as negative with this very positive of that chemistry has done a ton for us to date. And we wouldn't be living in the world. I wouldn't be able to come to you, present to those of you that are in Brazil, all the way from the United States up here in Vermont, without the technology that we have. And so we have to be thankful for chemistry, but also realize that it has had its negative impacts as well. So I do want to kind of start in the historical context of things and say that 1960, so 1960 may seem like a long time ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. It was the first time that there was really awareness of chemicals in the environment. And this came from a book that was written, which was called Silent Spring. It was written by Rachel Carson, and she was actually a biologist, but she was talking about out in the environment, she was starting to see silent springs, which is the name of the book. But silent springs were being caused by what was, at the time, the first really environmental pollutant of concern, which was DDT. And DDT, I've got the chemical composition up here, so if you're interested in looking at that, you can. But what it was really doing was it was an insecticide. It was widely used, it was widely sprayed. You can see it here being put over crops to really protect forestry against harm. And so it was also used to prevent and used on military soldiers. So everything from human contact is coming in contact with humans, the environment. And what we found was that there were unintended consequences of DDT. It was something that accumulated in the fatty tissues of animals. And so that meant it built up, and then it went on into the food chain, and it was really persistent. And so now it's actually classified as a persistent organic pollutant. And it was really kind of at that time that Silent Spring came out that focus was put on DDT and how are we going to regulate this? This is obviously a chemical of concern that we need to be thinking about. And so DDT in the 1972 was, there was a cancellation order. So we moved away from DDT, but it was really something that we were using widespread and was really the first thing that was called out in Silent Springs by Rachel Carson. There were other environmental impacts that were happening. So this one comes from Cleveland, Ohio in 1969. Before we were really aware of the term green chemistry, the solution to pollution was dilution. And so what that meant was that we were releasing chemicals out into the environment. And so releasing them out into the environment, we thought was the way that we could control their harm, that if we made the concentration lower, we wouldn't have the effects that we were seeing. So things were being dumped into rivers such as gasoline, oils, and paints and metals. And this river had many different colors. And so when it really caught fire, literally caught fire, it received national attention. It was in Times Magazine and it was on the cover. And it really was a concern for society as a whole. So this is just a statement from Times Magazine where you can see society is really realizing that chemicals are getting out into the environment. And so it's talking about really anyone who falls into this river doesn't drown, they decay. And so they say this jokingly, but it really is to highlight the fact that there were chemicals of concern in their waterways, in their drinking resources. So what we see happen here in the United States is that the US Environmental Protection Agency, which we call the EPA, was established in 1970. The first Earth Day happened, and this is all really kind of movement from society after seeing these environmental impacts. We see DDT banned. There's a Clean Water Act because of the fact that they saw the rivers. So now we need to clean up the waters that we have polluted with that dilution idea of how we deal with pollution. And then in 1976, we see the first time that there is an act put out which controls toxic substances. So this is called TSCA. So if you've heard of TSCA before, this is the first time that the EPA is going to be tracking toxic materials out into the environment. And so it's really looking at things in terms of quantity, restriction, all of those things. However, it really doesn't cover all of the toxic chemicals that could be out there because it doesn't include food, drugs, cosmetics, or pesticides. So it did help in the terms of things such as disposal for specific chemicals, including polychlorinated biphenyls, asbestos, radon, and lead-based paint. So this is really the kind of timeline of things in terms of moving forward. How do we get to green chemistry, the term overall? So if we go from the 1970s to the 1980s, it was the first time that we realized that these chemicals were also having an impact on our stratosphere. And so we see the ozone layer, that there's now clear from the data that is being collected by environmental scientists that there is a hole in the ozone. And so again, I think it's awesome that there's another woman involved in the kind of studies here and bringing this to light. And so it talks about how CFCs, which are chlorofluorocarbons, are causing this hole in the ozone. So we realize that there's a hole, there's many more chemical disasters that I could kind of highlight and go through. But to say not only are CFCs a problem, there are many other atmospheric pollutants that we start realizing are out in the environment. So you'll see throughout this talk, I'm also trying to highlight resources. I will share these slides as well, so you have them as a resource. But these are kind of covering as many things as I possibly can in terms of why we have the term green chemistry and environmental impacts of chemicals out in the environment. So I mentioned environmental disasters. A big one that you may be familiar with, maybe not be familiar with. I remember it being the first thing I really learned about in chemistry and thought, wow, like chemistry is really bad for the environment. And so it was in Bhopal, India, where there were a lot of people who died from the result of an exposure, and many people suffer from the lasting impacts of this. And so it was Union Carbide that had a leaking factory, and it really is kind of the fact of saying, how do we store chemicals? Why do we have hazardous chemicals? All of these types of things, but it was methyl isocyanate. It was used to make a pesticide, and it was being stored in large quantities. So this was an environmental disaster that we just, at the time, this was how we operated. This is how the industry operated. And so it is something to just kind of highlight. This is 1984, again, not that long ago. So all of these things lead in 1990 to the Pollution Prevention Act. So this, again, was something from the EPA. It goes along with the Clean Water and Air Act amendments. So we see kind of a revising of the Clean Water Act, and then the Air Act comes in. So again, we realize the hole in the ozone is being caused by those atmospheric pollution. So Pollution Prevention Act, this is the first time that we are thinking about preventing pollution rather than diluting pollution or how we deal with pollution after the fact. So it's really thinking about source reduction. How do we avoid the pollution from the very beginning? And this is from the EPA in 1990. So it was really a mandate that they wanted to see that pollution was prevented or reduced at the source, and then recycling and treatment and disposal could be thought of as an afterthought. That we should really be thinking about how do we prevent pollution from the very beginning. And again, this was adopted by the EPA. And this is really the beginning of the groundwork of the movement for green chemistry. So green chemistry comes after this long history in the United States and of course globally of where we're seeing impact of chemistry out in the environment. And we're starting to really realize that chemistry has an impact on the world that's around us. And so it really sparked the movement that is called green chemistry. And so I will say the next kind of timeline of things, there are lots of things that all kind of happen at once. Once we start thinking about pollution prevention, there are lots of people that come into play here. And I will say I only have a snapshot of everyone that has been involved in this movement. It would take probably 30 years to get it right in terms of the history of green chemistry for sure. But a big player is Joe Breen, and he was at the EPA, and he is kind of termed the heart and soul of green chemistry, if you will. He, in 1993, wrote a book on pollution prevention, again, around that Pollution Prevention Act. He organized the first kind of green chemistry symposium, if you will, in 1995. And then in 1996, the EPA established the Green Chemistry Challenge Awards, and they held the first Green Chemistry and Engineering Conference. That's by the ACS, the American Chemical Society. And in 1997, the Green Chemistry Institute, which we now know today as the ACS Green Chemistry Institute, at the time it was not associated with the ACS, but Joe Breen was the executive director of the Green Chemistry Institute until he unfortunately passed away in 1999. And so really some of the things that we know of today started way back during this timeline of the late 1990s. So I do want to, in this case, kind of move on to kind of, again, this time lapse of overlap of things, to who we know as the co-founders of green chemistry. As you can see from the timeline already, green chemistry was really born out of that Pollution Prevention Act, that mindset. And so green chemistry, the term, definition, and principles come from John Warner and Paul Anastas. And so I'm going to go into that piece of the story. And so really the origins of green chemistry and how the term and all of this kind of cascades into where we are today is really how John Warner and Paul Anastas came together. And it was around the EPA. And it's because John Warner was working at Polaroid and he was trying to bring a product to market. And he needed to have EPA approval because he wanted to use this low volume exception for pre-manufacturing notification. So what that means is that he was creating a product, and I will say, I hope that I'm doing justice to this. John Warner tells this story really, really well. He's an amazing speaker. So if you ever get a chance to see him speak online, in person, go and do it. So I'm trying to hone my inner John here to bring his story to life. But he talks about the fact that he's trying to bring this product to market and he kept getting these flags, and it's like, he knows that he's creating this product that is better for the environment, but yet there are these rules and regulations that are saying that he can't bring it to market. It's under this low volume exception, but it's not being kind of classified. So he has to go to Washington, DC, to go in front of the EPA to kind of justify his product, his process, why it is greener in his eyes, because both John Warner and Paul Anastas have been involved since 1990 in that idea of pollution prevention. And so again, the timeline on this, I'm not 100% sure on the dates and times, but I know that at this point, John Warner and Paul Anastas meet and they have a discussion about bringing this product to market and what is the chemistry that John Warner is doing here and how can they outline it. So John Warner, Paul Anastas, you have industry and government coming together to really talk about chemistry, and both of these men have PhDs in chemistry. So they're very much talking chemistry to each other, and how do we make sure that green chemistry has a definition and it has principles. And so in 1998, John Warner and Paul Anastas published a book together that is the seminal text. I will say I've got it right over here. It's something that I refer to often. It is not a big book, so I say you can read this. I read this in one day when I figured out what green chemistry was. It's a great book to have on hand, just for reference of all the things. But it has the 12 principles, it has the green chemistry definition in there. And so it was the first time that there was a precise definition for green chemistry and 12 principles that were laid out as the framework for the fundamentals to the science. And so this then became accepted as the general guidelines for green chemistry. And so this is a world-renowned book. It's printed in several different languages as well. And so it is something that those two came together to put out into the literature, if you will. So I'm gonna stop there for 1 second and say that green chemistry, as defined in the book, and also the benefits, are that it's the design of chemical processes and products that reduce or eliminate the use or generation of hazardous substances. And so there are 12 principles of green chemistry. They are meant to be a framework. They are really a benefit to that pollution prevention idea, because you are trying to eliminate the hazard first. And then if you can't eliminate the hazard, you're thinking about substitution, so using something less hazardous. Then you're thinking about those kind of engineering controls. Do you need a fume hood? Can you use it on the bench? Is it something that you need to put in a certain hazardous waste container? If you're thinking about administration controls, it's more of, is it regulated? Is it not regulated? And then that last PPE, personal protective gear, as a chemist, you are thinking about how can you protect yourself, but often we forget that if you're protecting yourself, there's a reason for that. You're protecting your health, but you should also be thinking about, I'm protecting my health. How am I protecting the environment when I'm using this as well? So in terms of the 12 principles, there are 12 of them. They each relate to different areas of a chemical process. So there are ones that are connected to a product, the raw materials, the starting materials, the process, and then the end of life. So thinking about what do we do with this chemistry after the reaction has happened. So green chemistry is the only science, and this is why John Warner and Paul Anastas were really wanted to define it, put principles on it, so that we could reduce the risk of chemistry out in the environment into human health. As chemists, we know that exposure is something we think about through our PPE, again, those hoods, the lab coat, your goggles, but it was the first time the principles really highlighted how to control hazards. And so this is really important for chemists and material scientists, as they have the greatest potential to impact pollution prevention. So that was really the motivation behind defining chemistry and then having those 12 principles, is that pollution prevention aspect. So this is why it ties back to that Pollution Prevention Act of the 1990s. So I do want to give you just kind of an overview, and I can't believe, again, these are two amazing chemists, world-renowned, all of their information on one slide, but we could again spend probably 30 minutes just diving into their background. That green chemistry was really a collaboration between government and industry. That John Warner was in the industry, he was at Polaroid Corporation. Paul Anastas was at the EPA. They both later went on to move into academia. Paul Anastas stayed in policy for a while, but you can see here that they moved into academia, and then actually John has gone back into industry to develop green technology, but also plays a major role in education as well, and holding professorships that aren't on this slide. He currently holds professorships at different institutions. And so both have made their way from industry and government into academia to share the learnings of green chemistry to really impact the next generation of chemists so that they can practice green chemistry that they both outlined in their text. So I do want to kind of move over to what were the main activities then, what has happened since that birth of green chemistry, if you will, in 1998. The text was written in 1998. So we are about, what, 27 years? My math skills off the top of my head aren't great, but we're roughly less than 30 years out from when it was defined, those principles were set. What has happened since then? And I mentioned this at the beginning of this talk, but I couldn't possibly fit everyone that has possibly been involved in this since the beginning. But I just want to highlight some of the main activities that have happened with different institutions, and then also things that are still going on today that are resources as well. So I will say that headlines are one major way that green chemistry has been kind of put out to the community. I would say community at large, so not just the chemistry community. These are news headlines talking about green chemistry. And why that's important is because the everyday person wants to have health and environmental protection. They do not want to have environmental impacts from the chemistry they have, but they do because of the way that we have been practicing chemistry. So headlines were one of the ways that green chemistry really started to get out into the kind of everyday population of our societies by the news. Conferences is one way that we see green chemistry getting out into really the academic world, the industry world as well. There are tons of conferences around sustainability, sustainable chemistry, and green chemistry as well. And so I do want to highlight just some select ones and kind of when they started. So the ACS Green Chemistry and Engineering Conference, which is kind of called the GC&E for short, started in 1996. So this is going to be this year, its 26th annual run of the Green Chemistry Conference, and it happens in June each year. This year it's happening in Reston, Virginia. It is currently open for calls for symposium, but more information will come out. So again, this is a kind of the last 2 years has been a little bit of a silver lining, I will say, in that because we can't meet in person due to the pandemic, there has been a hybrid option. So maybe there will be a hybrid option in the 2020 version, but a good conference to check out to see what the green chemistry community from academia to industry to nonprofit to government is doing in this realm, this time period. Another resource is the Green Chemistry Summer School. So how is chemistry getting disseminated? This is a program for postgraduate, graduate students, and postdoctoral scholars, specifically within the Americas, so North America, South America. It was started in 2003, and it has about 50 students per year. This program is still active and running today, so I'm kind of putting this here as a push to go and check this one out. It's definitely something that if you're in graduate program, you want to apply to. It is a competitive program, but again, a way that green chemistry is being disseminated and through institutions. So this one is run by the ACS Green Chemistry Institute. There's also conferences by Iupac, so the Iupac International Conference on Green Chemistry. That started in 2006. So started in 2006. It was going to be on its 9th annual or 9th Iupac conference in 2020, but it was postponed due to the pandemic. So it will occur in 2022. So there's another conference that has started and continues to this day. There's also an Iupac postgraduate summer school on green chemistry. And this one is really done by a nonprofit out of Venice, Italy. So a great opportunity to go to Venice, Italy to learn about green chemistry. Again, a program that started a while ago and is still running today as a way to disseminate green chemistry. And again, globally. Now we're not just in the United States. Globally, there is a movement for green chemistry, and again, that connection back to sustainability. So networks is another way that green chemistry has been disseminated, partnerships with institutions. And so I'm just representing a bunch of networks. But one of them, and maybe you're very familiar with this as an ACS student chapter, is the Green Chemistry Student Chapter Awards. And so this was started in 2001. There are a ton of awardees. I couldn't go through and count them all, but tons of institutions have student chapter awards that or student chapters that have won the Green Chemistry Award. And so to do this, you have to do 3 green chemistry activities a year during the academic year, and then report them out in your ACS Student Chapter Award. So another way to get students involved in green chemistry, and this is from the ACS. An example I do want to talk about in terms of networks, and that I'm very thankful for, is the network of early career sustainable scientists and engineers. This started a little bit later in 2013 and actually came out of the ACS summer school. And so really this is people wanting to stay together, like-minded scientists and engineers that are trying to find the connections between sustainability and the work that they do. And so there's more information here about NESI, and I'd be happy to talk about it anytime as well if you are interested in learning more. Journals are a way to also disseminate the information about green chemistry. Again, a bunch of institutions involved here in this process as well. But I do want to highlight the Green Chemistry Letters and Reviews. So this was started in 2007. It's a fully open access, which means free to the reader, journal that is looking at bringing together academia, teaching, industry, environmental scientists, law, and policy makers. And so there's a whole list. I have this link in the slides. Again, I will share this slide deck with you all and a link in the chat so that you can access these. But journal articles are a great way to find who is doing green chemistry. And again, that is not the only journal you could check out. It's just a free and open access one that I want to highlight. But articles are a great way to find out who's doing green chemistry, what topics are they doing it around, what topics are you interested in learning about. And so again, goes to that dissemination of green chemistry and the institutions that are involved in that. I do want to highlight a resource that is curriculum. I'll talk more about curriculum a little bit later on, but there are many more resources available, but this is one that I just wanted to highlight because there is an English version and then also a Portuguese version as well. And so these are really the first green chemistry modules that were developed around industry technologies. So these were developed around those green chemistry challenge awards that I mentioned earlier from the EPA. These modules are built off of those awards. So there's a direct connection to industry. And so these were really the first green chemistry modules that were put out by the University of Scranton and Mike Can, who was an amazing green chemistry advocate, still is to this day, pushing for green chemistry and all of the textbooks that are possibly out there. And so these are a great resource that were definitely a way of disseminating green chemistry from those green chemistry presidential awards into academia, kind of on that timeline that we're talking about. So business is missing an S here, but businesses are definitely involved in bringing green chemistry out, disseminating green chemistry, as I just mentioned, taking the technologies from industry into academia is one great way to disseminate green chemistry, education, teaching, learning, all the things that are actually going into practice. So the GC3 is one way that businesses get together, and the GC3 started in 2005. And so it's the Green Chemistry and Commerce Council. And this, all the logos of businesses that you're seeing on this slide are brought together by the GC3 to share their best practices. And they're all looking to mainstream green chemistry. So they want to see greener products out in the market. So they are brought together to learn from one another. And so that's a great way that through businesses, green chemistry is being disseminated. So I hope that covers again, a snapshot of the main activities in disseminating green chemistry in the United States and beyond. I will say it's not just the United States that is involved in that dissemination. It is kind of a global effort in early 2000s, as you see by the kind of dates of when things were started. So I am going to shift over to the creation of Beyond Benign and a little bit more of my perspective, and I would say Beyond Benign's perspective, loosely around green chemistry education. I will say the position and evolution of green chemistry in the last 30 years, of course, it's me speaking, so it is my position, but a lot of the things that I have seen and will present to you today are through Beyond Benign and the work that I've done at Beyond Benign. So Beyond Benign is a nonprofit organization that was founded by John Warner and Dr. Amy Cannon in 2007. So I mentioned that John had gone back to industry, and this was in 2007 that he left the University of Massachusetts, where he had started the first green chemistry PhD program. Dr. Amy Cannon holds the world's first green chemistry PhD. And so they came together to form Beyond Benign, which is dedicated solely to green chemistry education. And the mission of Beyond Benign has changed since it started in 2007, but currently today it's dedicated to fostering a green chemistry education community that empowers educators to transform chemistry education. And so since 2007, Beyond Benign has done a ton of things. Again, I could spend a ton of time talking about Beyond Benign and all of the things that it has done. But Beyond Benign does work from K through 12 to higher ed to industry. And it's really because of this theory of change that green chemistry is at the center of all of the things that we need to get to human health, the sustainable human health and the environment. So we need to have education at the K through 12 level, higher ed level, and then also it needs to be practiced out in industry so that we can have benign materials, processes, and products. So Beyond Benign's theory is really that education and innovation are central to achieving a sustainable society. So as I'm talking to probably students as well as faculty members possibly, I want to touch on the Green Chemistry Commitment Program that was started by Beyond Benign in 2013. So 2013 was the kind of cultivation of the Green Chemistry Commitment, which we call the GCC program. There were 13 institutions at the time that started this program, and it's a consortium program that unites the green chemistry community. It really looks to grow the community of green chemists, so to bring green chemistry into the educational system, to really change the way that we teach chemistry overall. And so the Green Chemistry Commitment has 4 student learning objectives: theory, so knowing about green chemistry principles, being able to practice them in the lab, so laboratory skills; toxicology, but toxicology for chemists, so being able to design chemical synthesis and be thinking about the human health and impact along the way; and then application, being able to apply green chemistry to society. So we already kind of touched on the fact that green chemistry is out in the general public through those headlines. Consumers want better products. They want to have healthy products for themselves and also the environment as well. So currently 86 signers are signed on to the Green Chemistry Commitment Program, and here is a map on the right of where they are located. It is a global program, and I will say gaining a lot of attention globally. We do have a signer in Brazil, and so we do also have signers in Colombia as well, and we look forward to having more. So I will say this is a pitch for the GCC at your institution if you are not a GCC signing school. So what in terms of we do at Beyond Benign, we try to get people started in green chemistry. So again, going back to the idea of disseminating green chemistry, we do the Green Chemistry Commitment, toxicology for chemists. You can't achieve some of the green chemistry principles without knowing about toxicology. So toxicology for chemists is really how to do chemistry in a way that we are thinking about human health and the environment from the very beginning, and you're able to talk to a toxicologist, because toxicology is a huge field that stands on its own, but chemists need to know how to minimize the impacts of the chemistry that they are doing. So we have lots of things in terms of professional development, curriculum, all of the things in terms of supporting that community that I mentioned we were trying to foster. So I do want to highlight that there's more curriculum, specifically from Beyond Benign and from our teachers at the K through 12 level, for elementary school all the way to higher ed, on the Beyond Benign website. It's all open access. It can be used by anyone that is interested in using it. And of course, from Beyond Benign side, we'd love to know how you're using it and what you're using it for. But it is open access. All of it is free to download, investigate. In the higher ed section, there's actually a full course curriculum on green chemistry, slides, PowerPoints, same thing, PowerPoints, lesson plans, tests, all sorts of things if you're looking to learn more about green chemistry specifically. So the Green Chemistry Commitment Program I mentioned is consortium program. So we do have case studies from our Green Chemistry Commitment signers. These are just an example of those in 2020. But I do just want to highlight again that just as green chemistry has a timeline of how it came to be and kind of what has happened since its establishment in 1998, each institution that starts in green chemistry and bringing it into their institution has a timeline as well. So this is an example of the University of Toronto and their timeline. So they started in 2005, and now in 2019, they published a paper on their really departmental view on how they are practicing green chemistry among students and the culture that they have on campus. So it is, again, something that takes time to get into the curriculum. Just another example is from Seton Hall. They are a newer signer of the Green Chemistry Commitment. And so just again, why they signed on, what are they up to? We have, again, resources to promote the department signing on to the Green Chemistry Commitment. But really highlighting, I hope what I'm highlighting for you here is that it is not an instant shift from going from teaching chemistry, as we've been teaching chemistry for many, many years, to teaching chemistry with a sustainability lens through green chemistry. It's a progress, it's a process, it takes time for these institutions to do, and everyone does it on their own time scale, with what works for them, what resources they have on campus, but they all come together to share their learnings through the Green Chemistry Commitment Program. So that is kind of the creation and what Beyond Benign has been up to. And so now I just want to try to transition over to, and hopefully kind of wrapping up our kind of position on the evolution of green chemistry in the last 30 years, and then moving on to some challenges and limitations. So I guess our viewpoint on green chemistry in the last 30 years is I've told you there's a ton of things going on, but I also started this talk talking about environmental regulations and how that led us to green chemistry. Environmental regulations have not stopped. There have been a number of laws that have come into place since the evolution of us understanding that chemicals have an impact on the environment, right? So it's not like green chemistry came into play, we solved all the problems, and we're not still seeing environmental problems, human health problems. We still see those things. So to say that we have solved problems in the last 30 years, yes, of course, but realize that environmental regulations are still happening because we are still experiencing impacts from chemicals that have been used in industry over many, many years of time. And that, again, that transition time to having green chemistry put into place takes time. This is really because the chemical products of the 21st century are all based on chemistry. So everything around us is chemistry, it's chemistry based. Someone made these pieces and components in a lab. There are building blocks here that are made out of chemistry. And so there isn't an industry that you can't talk about that isn't touched by chemistry. And so it's really this idea that consumer products are still having those unintended consequences because of the fact that those that are out there making them are still working on those old chemistry backgrounds. We haven't had a full transition over to chemistry and green chemistry principles and practices yet. And so we are still seeing effects. So these are just examples of some of the things that are out in industry and what we're seeing. So maybe you've heard of PFCs. One of the biggest things I would say recently, and it's charged with cancer, right? How are we having these things still happen? Again, it's that chemists aren't trained in green chemistry. They're not thinking about human health impacts. Yet these things are in process and progress out into the industry already, and trying to switch things once they've already been made is very, very hard, right? So BPA is probably one very familiar with. There's lots of things that say BPA free. Is it a better switch? We will find out, right? It takes time, again, in terms of the human health and environmental impacts that we see from a product that is made, a process that is made. So really to say that we are doing better, of course, but we are still having these lasting impacts because of the way that we've been doing chemistry for so long, and that we are not away from, I mentioned the Bhopal, India, 1986 disaster. We're not away from disasters yet. This is a recent event. This is talking about hazardous waste and why it's really important that we need to continue to think about hazardous waste reduction. This was in July of 2021. This is an explosion of complex solvents in a waste management center. So these organic solvents were stored in containers at the center before being incinerated. So this is, again, to that kind of point of we need to think about the waste that we are producing overall. But I do want to highlight that there's no such thing as a green chemical, there's only greener. So again, this idea of a timeline, a process, it takes time to shift as we continue to learn about human health and environmental impacts. So going back to our ozone example, we talked about CFCs as causing the ozone hole. We as chemists got better and realized that. We realized from the data out in the environment that we needed to switch up the chemical that we were using. But refrigeration is very important. That's what CFCs are mainly used for. So we switched to HFCs, and GWP is the global warming potential. So we see a decrease in global warming potential, but HFCs had similar issues. We still see problems. And so there again is a chance to make a greener product overall. And so again, that idea of it being a process, that we are in the development of greener, it's never going to be this is green. And so that idea of kind of a growth mindset, if you will, that we are continuing to grow in the chemical industry and to make better products and processes as we go. So there has lots of work that has been done, but there's much more to do. And I will say that the future is bright. So I know my last kind of piece is to talk about barriers and all of that stuff. What I will just say is that the beyond benign vision is that we envision a world where the chemical building blocks and products used every day are healthy and safe for humans and the environment. We are not there yet. Our mission is not done. Our vision has not been hit. So there are many industries and academic institutions that are tackling this challenge of green chemistry education and practice, but much more collaboration and momentum is needed for this systematic change to happen, for us to really see healthy products and processes out in the environment. So, excuse me. What are some things that have been helpful? And again, just kind of giving timeline and context to things. The green chemistry in the curriculum, a supplement to the ACS guidelines. So here in the United States, and I'm not sure about your programs where you are located, but there is often an ACS degree. And this has a guideline from the ACS of what chemists should be taught. And so this was released in 2018. Again, the downside to this is that's 20 years after the 12 principles of green chemistry were established, but it's a supplemental way of how to bring green chemistry into courses that are already being taught. So it gives context as well as examples of how to bring green chemistry into everyday courses. So this is a really great resource for teachers to use if they want to bring green chemistry into a course and how they can do it through context that they are already teaching within a course. I mentioned those Green Chemistry Challenge Awards as being established way back in the 1990s. And these are for different areas. So there are 5 different areas, from academia to industry to benign chemical synthesis, reaction, synthetic pathways. But to date, 120 awards have been given. And so we can see that green chemistry is definitely being explored, and the impacts that this has had are huge. So it's 826 million pounds of hazardous chemicals have been eliminated each year. 21 billion gallons of water saved each year. 7.8 billion pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent released into the air eliminated each year. So we know that green chemistry practices out in industry and academia have a huge impact on what is happening for the environment overall. So I will also say that we see, in terms of, again, a good thing and a bad thing, that in Science in 2020, I believe this paper was published, talks about going to the chemical sector of tomorrow. And the chemical sector of tomorrow looks a lot like having green chemistry principles and a circular economy in your chemical sector of tomorrow. So a good thing that we are switching towards this mindset, that we are having industry think about this, but again, that kind of we're far along in the game of knowing about green chemistry to be having this shift. But again, that understanding of it does take time. So I will say another pro is that, again, that GC3, that Business Council, has a joint statement on using greener chemistry and safer alternatives. And they also support green chemistry education. So this is big, that industry is backing green chemistry education as a place where it needs to go. I do want to just kind of loop back to the United States and where this all kind of started, and maybe where we're going in the future here in the United States, is that John Warner testified at a House of Representatives committee meeting on science, technology, and research on the Sustainable Chemistry and Research Development Act in 2019. So just recently, and just recently this policy went into effect. And so this is really great because it means that green chemistry concepts are going to be in US policy. This is a 10-year plan, so starting in 2021, it is a 10-year plan that is being rolled out. But as you can see here in CNE News, they talk about sustainable chemistry legislation enacted by US Congress. And this gives us a green chemistry concept to be put into federal grants. And so I do just want to highlight, because I haven't said it much during this talk, but that term sustainable chemistry, if we think about sustainability, we can talk about sustainability in lots of different aspects across the board. Sustainable chemistry is a subset of sustainability. If we want to talk about sustainability, we can do anything sustainably. So sustainable chemistry has many things underneath it. It talks about remediation, talks about water purification. How about alternative energy, those solar cells? All of those types of things would be sustainable chemistry. Green chemistry is a subset of sustainable chemistry. And so here in the United States, the next 10 years, be defining what does sustainable chemistry mean. Does green chemistry play a role into this? And that's really what Dr. John Warner was testifying about when he talked about this sustainable chemistry legislation, was that green chemistry needs to play a major role because it is a defined science. It has the 12 principles of green chemistry. And so we need to make sure we're talking about green chemistry because of the fact that chemists know at the bench what they need to do when they practice those green chemistry principles. So here, I just want to kind of highlight that green chemistry and also education reform to tackle sustainability is happening as well. So the Times Magazine released an article about the unexpected ways that climate change is reshaping college education. And it's reshaping college education because what we're realizing, and what institutions are realizing, students are realizing, is that they may not be being trained on the skills that they need to solve these global challenges that we're seeing out there. And the green chemistry commitment was highlighted as one of the ways within this article. So it was really exciting to see that connection to climate change and the green chemistry commitment. So I do just want to kind of quickly wrap up with talking about challenges and limitations in implementation of sustainable practices in colleges, universities, and companies. And I will say, again, it's often my viewpoint, Beyond Benign viewpoint, to say, okay, we see the challenge, but what's the positive side of this? What's the solution to this problem? Because we can point out challenges all the time, but how do we overcome these barriers? And so I will say that common challenges in implementing new strategies or curriculum across the board, it is no matter what you're trying to do, it is going to be about time and energy. If it's specifically talking about education, we already are teaching all of these things. How do we fit more in? It's about how do you know what you're supposed to be doing? How do you know what the best advances are? It's always about cost. If we're talking about industry, if we're talking about academia, it's about how much is this going to cost? Sharing is always an issue. I think it's getting better in this day and age. I will say, I think the pandemic is a silver lining to this, of us being able to share virtually in many, many spaces. Resources, creating resources that don't stay with silos is often an issue as well, making sure that after you create something, you share it out. So what I hope I'm kind of highlighting here is that these are common challenges across the board for academia and industry. There's a fear of change. There's a fear of a misconception. There's a fear of doing things differently than we have done them before. And so really thinking about what does it take to bring an idea or innovation to full adoption. So I'm kind of spewing the words of Amy Cannon here in thinking about transformation. How do we transform the chemistry, education, industry overall? It takes an innovation, it takes people, it takes talking about it, it takes time, and it takes network. And so here on this graph is talking about the diffusion of innovation. So something starts out, you always have the people that started it, the innovators, the John Warners, the Paul Anastas, the early people within this movement. Then you have the early adopters, the people that got it, heard it, were like, yes, we need to do this. Then there's the early majority, the people that realize that it's good for industry, it's good for academia. There are always going to be late people, and then people that come on even at the end are kind of forced to do this work because we know it's something that needs to be done within academia and within industry. So again, this is something that is not unique to green chemistry. It's something that is in any innovation takes time to get change to happen overall. And so it really is, and from our viewpoint at Beyond Benign, a benefit of social networks in education reform. I will also say I've seen the same thing from presentations at conferences. It's the same thing in industry. Having a social network, having that support, realizing that each other are moving in this direction towards sustainability really fuels movements. And so social networks are a primary vehicle for the dissemination of innovation. I will say one major thing that is helpful in kind of bringing everyone together is the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Sustainable Development Goals, we cannot achieve these goals without chemistry. We need to think of chemistry as the solution to our sustainable problems, that we can use chemistry to solve these issues. And so Sustainable Development Goals really give green chemistry a place to connect into. So there are associated sustainable development goals, 3, 9, 4, 12 specifically. You can find that direct kind of attachment to green chemistry. And again, this idea that all sustainability initiatives that are going on are happening around this kind of core central theme of we need green chemistry to happen at the center, so that we can have our circular economy, so that we can affect climate change, so that we can look at ocean plastic, so we can hit those sustainability goals of the UN that is set forth. And so this really comes, again, there is growth in this area, there's expected growth in this area, but there's also demand from consumers as well. So it's also, these sustainability goals sustainable development goals are being taken into companies. And so here's just an example from DuPont, their 2030 sustainability goals. This one, number 3, is that they're going to design 100% of their products and processes using sustainability criteria, including the principles of green chemistry. So if you're looking for kind of where to use green chemistry skills or who's looking for green chemistry skills, take a look at the sustainable goals for an industry, for a company. I'm sure they're calling them out in there. So I do just want to kind of stop here and say, again, that idea of we can see lots of challenges, but we can also see the opportunities. And if you are a chemistry student or a chemistry professor or a researcher, you're a chemist, you're creating molecules, you have the power to determine human health and environmental impacts. And it's with that association of the chemicals that you are using, generating, all of these things, what you dispose of in the end. And so this quote comes from John Warner. And what I'm kind of hoping to sum up here is that with great power comes great responsibility. We are the makers of molecules. We need to understand the human health and environmental impacts. And so I would urge you that if you don't have the current resources that you need, that they are out there. I've highlighted tons of them through this presentation, that there is this movement of chemists, scientists that are out there doing green chemistry. And so I do want to highlight one great student group that started on its own by graduate students that just wanted to talk about green chemistry, didn't think their department was doing enough green chemistry, got together, started a video campaign, trivia challenges that turned into an annual symposium. In that timeline, it's not something that happened all at once, it's something that slowly happened. But you can see here in 2016, the GCI, so this student group, facilitated the U of P becoming the first Canadian institution to sign the GCC. And so I would highly recommend you check out their resources. They have tons of great resources, and they're an awesome student group to take a look at for how students can be change makers in green chemistry education within an institution. I will also say that they have great resources for just ways to bring green chemistry and greener practices into any lab that you are doing. And what I love about this resource is that it also calls out the literature. So it gives you an example of what you should be doing instead. So for example, solvent solution, it says number 3, you should use 2-methyl THF instead of THF. But why, right? Often when you're making a change, if you are not the primary investigator, you're going to have to justify this to someone else. You're going to have to convince your PI or the researcher you are working under why you want to do this. They have highlighted the resource right there for you, so you can bring that literature document to the person and say, here's why I believe that I can do this. And again, this is all a student group putting these things together for their own use and then sharing them with other people as well. So they go on into waste reduction as well as energy reduction too. So again, a great resource to check out. This is all on one page. It doesn't fit on one slide, but it's a great resource to put out and just put on a hood of any lab that you are working in, academic or industry as well. So in just kind of wrapping up, I do want to say I've covered tons of things that have happened over the last 30 years. I think one of the biggest things to come is the green chemistry teaching and learning community, what is called the GCTLC, the online platform, where hopefully all of these things will come together. So K through 12, higher ed, and industry stakeholders are being engaged currently to launch this platform in 2023. And so we're inviting you to join us online when that starts launching, to start test piloting it. This is from Beyond Benign and also the ACS Green Chemistry Institute. And so this collaborative idea of everyone starting to come together to really shift in this direction of green chemistry education and industry is definitely happening, and it's coming in 2023 as an online platform. I do also want to give an opportunity from Beyond Benign that we host bi-monthly Green Chemistry Connections. These are events, virtual, open to anyone, students, professors, industry as well that wants to tune in and make connections around green chemistry education. Our one in September specifically is going to be featuring our Dow partnership. So we've been working with Dow to advance green chemistry education so the future workforce can do sustainable action for them and their products and processes. So Dr. Marjorie Coates-Clerc is a senior researcher specialist at Dow, and she's going to be talking about her green chemistry education and pathway. And then we have 3 of our green chemistry commitment signers talking about their initiatives as well. So I will kind of sign off there in terms of content-wise and say thank you for your time and attention. I feel like I've covered a ton in a short amount of time, or maybe a long amount of time, depending on how long I've rambled on. But I do want to just open it up for questions. Feel free to either put things in the chat for me, but always feel free to reach out. My contact information in terms of my email is here on the slide, or you can always reach me on Twitter. And I am just going to put into the chat here a link to this presentation as a PDF. So if there was anything that you were interested in, you can go and take a link. I've hopefully linked the resource right in there. But if I haven't, feel free to let me know in an email. And I will just stop there and say, are there any questions? I see questions in the chat. Perfect.
Thank you, Natalie. We're now open to questions. Feel free to write your question in the chat or open a microphone. And we already have a couple questions here. So one question: we have followed over the decades the creation of new processes and products that have brought new concerns about social and environmental impacts. In the company of technology and environmental chances, which can result in new possible ways of pollution, is it possible that new principles of green chemistry will be also added?
So I think that in terms of will there be new principles of green chemistry added, I don't believe so. I don't think that either John Warner or Paul Anastas have plans of kind of revamping those principles. But I do think that that connection between what is green chemistry in practice at the bench and what is sustainable chemistry will become stronger and clearer in how do we think about environmental impact, economic impact. What are the barriers? How do we think about systems thinking in terms of what is the system that matters? Because even if we still are seeing impacts, and again, we do have to think about, has green chemistry education really made it into all of the industries, all of the academics, or all of the teachings of a chemistry background in the products and processes we're seeing today? Probably not. There's still probably tons of innovation that can happen if we were all thinking about green chemistry. So I don't think there'll be new principles added, but I do think that there will be more framing and even more understanding as we continue to learn.
Right. Another question, has Beyond Benign achieved large-scale dissemination in green chemistry, or are there still challenges to overcome? If so, what challenges?
Sure. So I would say we do have those 86 green chemistry commitment signers, but that is just our higher education work. We also do K through 12 education as well and have reached a large number of people, but I think that there is a ton of work to still do. The challenges to overcome are really that fear, misconception, crowded curriculum. How do I change what I've been doing? How do I teach green chemistry if I didn't learn green chemistry? If it wasn't in my educational background, how could I possibly teach it to someone else? I know that's a fear of faculty members. And so really it is mainstreaming green chemistry is the way that we're going to overcome these challenges. So having more discussions about green chemistry, having more people practice green chemistry, and also that understanding that change doesn't happen all at once. Small baby steps of change is still change in the right direction, too, is one of the biggest challenges I think we need to overcome.
Yeah, okay. One more question here. How are the works for production of green batteries for electric vehicles?
This is a good question. So how, can you repeat it one more time?
How are the works for production of green batteries for electric vehicles?
So I would say I don't know everything about the green battery technology industry, but I'm sure it's something that's being researched. It's something that I was in my research was kind of in battery technology, fundamental studies of battery technology. And so I know that there was green chemistry work going on in there. But I don't know specifically at what level we are at yet. But again, that idea of we are always more moving towards greener, right? So we are going to find a solution that is greener than what we had today, but it won't be the greenest. There's no such thing as perfection. There's no such thing as a green version of something. We will always learn that we can do better overall too. So I'd be happy to answer more if they want to give more context via email. But I think that's my short answer on that one.
All right. Does anyone else have a question?
I do have a question, if that's okay. Thank you, Lydia. Natalie, you're talking about, hi, thank you, Natalie, for the presentation. It was amazing. So you talked a lot about like industry, education, like academia. Do you feel like one of these, like, I don't even know, like one of these has a larger role to play in this establishment of a greener future kind of a thing? Like, I know it's too broad.
Yeah. No, these are all big discussions, all big questions. It's great. It's great to think big. I think that education is definitely key, that we can't have products and processes that come out of industry if we're not educating on how to make them. So I do think education is a big component within academia, within industry that needs to be tackled. But I do think industry highlighting the green chemistry principles and practices they're putting into place and the products that are out there that they have produced is also going to help the overall momentum of this movement towards greener practices as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I don't think so. So we're now closing the question session. And we'd like to thank all attendees. And thank you, Natalie, as well, for accepting our invitation and for the content you shared. Bom, então, muito obrigada a todos que participaram da palestra. Agora faremos um intervalo e retornaremos às 14 horas com a oficina Química Verde e a perspectiva CTS, a técnica dos 6 chapéus como estratégia de ensino centrado no estudante, coordenada pelas professoras Júlia Buzon, Juliana Brandão e Soriana Varão. Às 16 horas, teremos a segunda aula do minicurso Análise de Ciclo de Vida, que será ministrado pelo instrutor Michel Serra, mestrando na Escola de Química da UFRJ. Todos estão convidados para participar dessas atividades. Até mais tarde.